My presentation is Tangled Web using deception and defense. This is considered an up-and-coming technology, to be honest. Yes, we've had honeypots for years and years. I heard about them personally probably 10 or 15 years ago. But at the time, they were kind of sold as, hey, throw these out there, maybe somebody will stop by, you can kind of look at people, see what they're doing, those kinds of things. Not of particular interest or providing a lot of value to most businesses, right? Businesses didn't really care what attackers out there were trying to do. But due to some of the limitations on the major tool suites, a high number of false positives, when you're dealing with huge networks, the current tools have gaps, right? I mean, we see breaches every day. So there's from very major companies that have a lot of these tools. So obviously there's something missing in today's security stack. The obligatory bio page, you got most of this from the other thing. Two things that are important is, I'm not speaking on behalf of my company. Opinions are my own, have nothing to do with my company. They totally disavow if you capture me, they're going to forget they ever knew me. And I am not a lawyer. In this talk, as long as we don't get sidelined, and it's very easy to get me sidelined, everything here should be fine because it's all happening in your infrastructure. If we get sidelined and start talking about things that you do outside of your infrastructure, I'm not a lawyer, didn't tell you to do it. Talk to your own lawyer about legalities. In general, whatever you do to somebody off your infrastructure, probably local laws apply, so who knows, right, at that point. Love this quote from Winston Churchill. In wartime, truth is so precious that she should be always attended by a bodyguard of lies. I don't know which came first, the quote or Operation Bodyguard. But for those of you who might have a history buff, you might know the Allies created an entirely fake army in England, right? To fool the Germans into thinking that we were going to come across at Calais, because that was the closest point, rather than go down to Normandy. And it worked. It worked wonderfully. If you've seen some of the movies that go, oh, we don't want to wake Hitler, that kind of thing, which may or may not be true, but one thing that is absolutely certain is that German high command also believed this. So they were very slow to deploy their assets down to Normandy to stop it. Gave precious hours to the Allies to get across at Normandy. So this picture, and here's a good link for information on that. This picture is they had blow-up tanks, and these guys were positioning the blow-up tanks. One of the key things, though, that made this, so you may peripherally know about that, but there's actually a unit that did communications for that army, right? If they just do the tanks out and all the fake stuff, but they forgot that key component about, hey, you know what? Armies talk to each other. They report maintenance issues and, you know, give orders and those kinds of things. So one of the key things we're going to hit again and again in deception is, if you want to fool an advanced enemy, you really need to get very good at your simulations, right? There are various levels of attackers. There's various levels of simulation that you need to provide. So the other reason for talking about war is there's an impact here that I think is very warlike, right? I'm not trying to be FUD or intentionally pump this up, but the fact of the matter is when somebody comes and attacks you, who's the legal authority that you can go to stop the attack, to push it back? If somebody's checking the doors and windows on your house, you can call somebody, right? And they'll at least come and investigate and maybe find the person, say, you can't wander around the neighborhood trying doors and windows. One of the things about warfare is there's really no rule of law. And I would suggest that currently in our environments, there's no rule of law. When you stick code out on the web, it's globally accessible. Sure, you can try to geofence and look at geolocations, but that's trivial to bypass, right? So essentially, you are putting it up there for the world to attack. So I think that warfare is appropriate in that, as well as the vast majority of the technology, deception technology, that we're trying to translate into cyber comes from Department of Defense, right? Comes from war type of thing. So we probably need to learn a little bit about military terminology to get good at this stuff. So deception goals. Our adversaries use deceptions as well, right? Our adversaries try to hide the fact that they're just normal traffic, nothing to see here, just come up, ignore me. There's no reason to monitor me. They will also try to distract you. Hey, look over there, that pretty shiny thing. Well, they're over here penetrating, right? Finally, ultimately, whether they are doing it for the lulz, because they hate you, because they want the money, because they just want to get in and see what they can do, nation state, whatever, from script kiddie on up, they're here to disturb you, right? They want to interrupt your environment in some way. So as defenders, we also have to have goals from our deception. If you forget everything else about this presentation, this is the most important thing. The point of defensive deception is to provoke an action on the part of the adversary. By the way, I will try to say adversary, but I'll switch red team with adversary frequently. But it's not enough that the adversary believes your lies. If they're not acting on those lies, you haven't done anything, right? So what's nice about that is you make sure you have a feedback loop to monitor them and go, yep, they bought that one. Yep, they bought that one. You know what? They're really not tripping over this one, or they're not doing what we expected them to do here. Let's change our deception to better track and better catch them. So one of the best things or biggest things why people are doing deception are detection, right? Look at every breach, and very rarely did they immediately know that the attacker was on their infrastructure, right? 46 days, Ponymon says, is the average time to detect a breach, right? 46 days. That's a lot of man hours that somebody can put into you, right? So one of the key things that we want to do is detect them as quickly as possible so we can start dealing with them. Obviously, we want to prevent them from doing damage to our system. So our deception should have a goal of let's prevent them from getting what they want. And obviously we need to do some sort of response, hopefully automated long enough for the people in our organization to get things moving and start doing some manual stuff, right? But those are our defensive goals. Deception is storytelling, right? It really is. You're trying to sell a story to your adversaries. How can you sell a story to people that you don't know? So the first thing you have to determine is, who are my adversaries? What are they after? What do they like? And the truth is, like I said, you're probably dealing with script kiddies that are just out playing, right? They just want to see what they can see. And so your deceptions don't have to be particularly robust to deal with them. You probably, if you're any size organization at all, have to deal with some sort of, at least for the lulz, for the hates, or I want to grab proprietary information out of your organization. So you're probably at least dealing with those two classes, right? If you're big enough, if you're in the right industry, something you may have to worry about, nation state, good luck, right? But the key, this is from Sun Tzu, 500 BC, deception is warfare. Warfare is deception. You want to appear weak where you're strong and appear strong where you're weak, right? That is your ultimate goal. So you want to have very strong areas, but appear weak there so they enter those strong areas. Where you don't want them to be, you want to look super strong there. Oh man, that's impenetrable. I'm going to go after this easy target, right? And the fact of the matter is we have both truths and deceptions. We want to reveal certain facts, right? We have to reveal the fact that we have URLs, we have web apps, we have this, right? But we want to be careful about the facts that we do reveal because we want to conceal, right? We want to conceal that all the good stuff's over here. We really don't want you to know that. So part of our deception campaign is, here's real stuff here. Right? I'm leading you through these breadcrumbs to the actual stuff, to the deception, whereas no need to look over there, nothing over there, don't look behind the curtain, right? Same with fictions. obviously we want to reveal our decoys. We want to reveal the breadcrumbs. We want to reveal the bogus stuff that we've set up in our web apps so that they come there, because that's where we're strong. But we also need to conceal stuff. We need to conceal the fact that it's a deception, right? Like I said, one of the famous honeypots, La Brea, is pretty easy for attackers now to detect, because you know what? It's not looking real. It's just sitting there doing nothing. So I'm not, back to our example, right? It's not communicating with anybody. It doesn't look like it's a real active part of our network, so it's pretty easy for the attackers to go, that's fake. A very interesting conundrum, and this is something you have to decide, is do you want to advertise your deception? You say, well, no, I want to hide it, right? Well, but if the attacker knows you're using deception, they have to double and triple and quadruple check everything that they do, and they have to be really slow and just, you know, very precise. So you can actually slow down the bad guys by doing that, right? Obviously, you lose the value of some of your simpler targets, but again, the really good adversaries aren't going to fall for that simple stuff anyway. So it's catch-22. It can be benefit, can hurt you. You have to make that decision. But ultimately, we're not really fooling people. We're not creating, let me rephrase, we are encouraging them in their stereotypes of our organization, right? Oh, I'm expecting that to happen. Yep, it happened. That's got to be real, right? And they start running down that path. So we're helping them deceive themselves, ultimately. So I said, it can help to know what is attacking our networks, because I don't know if you've ever turned on your logs on your personal websites or just, you know, your home address. Look at those logs. I did it a few years back, and this was years ago. 4 or 5 times, everybody was trying to use default IDs and passwords to see if I'm running MySQL, Postgres, right? All of this stuff, and that's my home. What's happening in your businesses? Who's coming and knocking on the door and checking the windows in your businesses constantly? So let's identify some of these folks when they come. One technology that's in use is browser fingerprinting. There's actually an open source product out there. If you Google browser fingerprinting JavaScript, you'll run into an open source. It's pretty cool to look at that source code. It gives you some idea of the kinds of things they're looking at browsers, right? They're looking at what plugins do you have installed, the resolution, screen resolution, blah, blah, blah. There's umptillion things. And there's more advances in the technology. There are a lot of folks that are now able to track you across machines even, right? So utilize those technologies to try to help identify your attackers. Some other ways to identify them, and this is military, but tools, techniques, and procedures. What are they doing, right? A lot of, when you see the attribution to App 28 or whatever, a lot of that's based on, well, they use these tools, and usually they do this when they want to pivot from here, and if they see this, then they're going to fire up this other tool and come in from that direction. So they're actually tracking, governments are actually tracking what are folks doing, what are attackers doing, and that helps them determine who is actually behind the attack. One of the key things, and obviously this is easy enough to correct, but request and response times, right? One of the key differentiators between humans and botnets is botnets are quick, right? Before you can even punch a button as a human, botnet has sent 5 more requests. Humans are much slower. Like I said, easy enough for a botnet to adjust their timing and stuff. But you've got the real information, because you know how long it typically takes a person to get through your web application. And a botnet can try to approximate that slowness, but they're probably not good enough compared to actual users. And obviously you want to track the interactions of your attackers. You want to see what they're doing for twofold. One, are they hitting my decoys and tripping the tripwires and all that good stuff? 2, are they getting around them and getting where they shouldn't be, right? That's something that, eyes on glass, you can track. So interestingly enough, I recommend that you need to tailor your responses based on the type of adversary you have. For script kiddies, sometimes it's just enough to throw up a dialog box that says, you're performing unauthorized actions, get off my network, right? that would work against script kiddies. They don't want the police showing up their parents' door, right? Those kinds of things. So maybe that's appropriate in some cases. Almost always, if that's not working, you want to entangle them, right? You want to grab hold of that session and make sure that they keep that session. So you want to keep them interested and get them off of your production systems into a separate area. You can slow down, right? We're talking web apps, web browsers. And by the way, there's totally different stuff for networks. And since it's OWASP, we're talking web apps, so that's the focus. You can slow them down, right? Talk to any red teamer. You've experienced it yourself. What happens when you click on something and it takes 10 seconds for that to come back? And then you click on the next thing, 10 seconds, click on it, 10 seconds, right? Slow them down, increase the response time. Just sit on their request for 10 seconds. If it's a human, you're going to drive them batty, right? Ultimately, you can break down. Once you know that this is an adversary and this is not a real customer, go up a 500 here. Oh, you broke my web app, way to go, right? And it's probably going to be a little bit scary for the adversary because somebody might actually investigate breaking a web app, right? That may lead them to be looking at you. If you know that it's a human, obviously you can log them out, and obviously you can block. Those are at the bottom rather than top because they can get another ID and log in typically. And if you block that IP address, they just use VPN or Tor and come in from another IP address, right? But with the fingerprinting and that other stuff, maybe you can actually stop them from session to session, right? If they're using the Russian language on their computer and you're pure US based and you've determined this is not a real customer, right? You can start using that analytics to decide to block immediately regardless of the IP. Botnets are a little bit different, right? CAPTCHA is one of the common ones. Again, we can debate how useful CAPTCHAs are, but it is certainly one of the technologies that people put in place to slow down botnets. Same with botnets. Entanglement works, slowing down works, right? Typically, if somebody fires up a botnet, they're not necessarily sitting on every one of those nodes and seeing what it's doing from second to second. So the more you slow it down, the more they tend to be threaded, right, and have some sort of throttle so they don't, unless they're going for a DDoS, they don't DDoS you, so maybe they only allow 10 requests to be outstanding. And if you slow down those responses, you slow down the requests. 500 works pretty well for that, right? A lot of botnets probably have some sort of code that says, if you get a 500, go do something else for a while, right? One of the interesting things, lie, right? What is the purpose of the botnet? If the purpose of that botnet, let's say you run a product catalog and you think that the purpose of that botnet is to collect your product catalog and your prices and stuff, once you recognize it's a botnet that's after that information, lie to it. You're not creating a contract, right? They come back and go, oh, their catalog just increased by 500% and their prices are half the price of ours. We better do something. Maybe, right? Logging out, again, is typically not particularly effective for botnets because they're multiple nodes, right? That's the whole point of a botnet. They'll just fire up 10,000 other nodes from another address. And so at least if you're distracting that one, they're probably not firing up a different one to come in another direction. So now the real deception, right? What kind of traps are we talking about? A generic term I'll use is decoys. And I think that most decoys fall into one of three categories. First one is tripwires, right? You think of the old military movies where they put pebbles in tin cans and tied it on a string, and when the enemy tripped across that string, the cans rattled, right? This is our detection. This is how we really increase our detection rates, by deploying tripwires throughout the application or our applications. So they're going to trip over a tripwire. That's going to alert us to the fact that this is an adversary. How do we know that? Because normal users won't trip over those tripwires. We're going to put the tripwires in places that normal traffic isn't coming in through, and I'll give you a demonstration of that here in a minute. The other thing I think of are mazes, right? Call them a tar pit, call them a maze, call them whatever. All we're looking to do here is just consume that red team's time, the adversary's time. They're going to sit there and spend a lot of time on a valueless target. Why? Because beats having them spend a lot of time on a valuable target, right? And hopefully we can discourage them enough that they eventually give up and go away because they couldn't hit our weak target. And then the third one is kind of a man trap, and you've seen the movies where they trip the tripwire and all the walls slam down and they're stuck in there with you, right? So one of the things you can do is move them completely off of your production network, spin up, maybe as you want, an Amazon cloud, and they're playing in the Amazon cloud, and your production network is all the way over here. But they are essentially restricted from actually getting back into your production sites. So let's talk a specific example. And I don't have code here. It's been a while since I've coded, but we will walk through an application I think would trip up almost any adversary that's coming to your site. So the first thing we need to talk about is robots.txt. Robots.txt is usually a text file that's put in front of every single web domain, right? And what its purpose is here's the stuff that I don't want Google and Bing and all of the search sites to go in and enumerate and throw up in the search engine, right? So it tells the polite search engines, don't go here. So how does the red team or an adversary see that? This is where the good stuff is, right? You're telling the adversary, this is the good stuff. So what happens if you put a couple of URLs in there, right? A couple of URLs that are decoys, that there's no way that your business people are going to that robots.txt and pulling off URLs. There's no business purpose for any of your employees or customers to go to that URL that's in robots.txt. The only person that's going to go there is somebody who's not interested in your best interest, right? So we throw a couple of URLs. One of them maybe looks to be admin.domain name, right? Again, you're red flagging. You're going, hey, this is good stuff. Come here. So once they get to our websites, what other kinds of decoys can we do? Well, I'll guarantee you that if a red team sees a hidden field on your web page that says admin equal false, it is irresistible. They are going to turn admin equal to true just to see what changes happens in your website. Guaranteed, right? Any red teamers here? Anybody not going to fall for that? You're going to do it. That's what red team does. They fuzz data. They do this kind of stuff. So they hit admin equal true. They're an attacker. No way your business partners are going to go in, look at the source code, see admin equal false, and change it to admin equal true, and resubmit that request. Users don't do that, right? Adversaries do that. So that could be in a hidden field on your form. Don't ask me how now, but perhaps some developer somewhere, someday, created something called encrypted, and they put it up in the URL string. And it looked something like this. And I noticed that it ended in equal or equal equal. It's not 100%, but the way base64 encoding works is it tends to pad such that you get equal, equal, equal. What that means is this is encoded, not encrypted. The difference is if I start speaking Spanish, anybody who knows the algorithm for Spanish can understand me. You don't need to know a secret. If it's encrypted, if you don't know the secret, you can't understand me. So this was not actually encrypted. But you want to red flag and get your attacker to come at you, mark it encrypted, and then just use encoding. And if you decrypted that, it would be admin equal false, right? So again, they're going to decrypt it, admin equal false, change it to admin equal true, resubmit, bam, attacker. End users don't do that stuff. You can also put it in cookies, obviously. Another interesting thing is if you have some sort of ID, doesn't really matter, ID whatever, and give it a particular number. Hopefully you make it unique for each session or something. If that number ever changes, you've caught an adversary, because there's no reason for anybody to ever change that number. But that's what adversaries do. They fuzz. And somebody said, well, I'll just stop fuzzing. I'm like, cool. If my adversary stops fuzzing my input fields, I don't have to worry about them finding SQL injection or cross-site scripting or anything, because that's the only way you find that stuff. By the way, that's a real thing, a clown spider. Happy Halloween. Okay, now we're all triggered, right? They have tripped over our tripwires. What do we do with the adversary now? Well, our admin app, remember, we appear weak where we're strong, is going to be on in a very hardened server. It's a one-way trip. They're not going to get back to production as long as we've ID'd them as adversaries with a session ID or whatever. And our server is secure except for, oh darn. Apparently, our admin app has a blind SQL injection vulnerability. Why that? Because the way blind SQL injection works is I have to send a tremendous number of responses to you, and I'm basically going, is the next letter A? No. Is the next letter capital A? No. Is the next letter B? No. Is the next letter capital B? Just a tremendous amount of responses. So they're being very noisy. We took that ninja and we have him stomping across gravel floors, right? I mean, just the noisiest thing possible. It's slow. It takes a lot of time and a lot of requests to pull information, extract that information. We can make it slower. We know it's an attacker. It takes you 10 seconds to get a response for every request you send, right? We've slowed you down tremendously. We probably are ticking you off quite a bit, so he ends up like that. We can also force them to utilize resources outside of our website, right? If we make that hash data or pretend like it's encrypted and it's totally bogus, we don't care. Let's say it's a creds and we hash them. Then they're going offline to break the hashes, wasting more of their time and resources. Then those creds are decoys, so as soon as they come back in and try to use the creds, bam, they've tripped our wire again. We know it's an attacker. We can also do a maze, right? If you search out there for HTTP tar pit, it's what it sounds like. You go to this page and it just has a bunch of links to another page. And again, you have to get more sophisticated than just pages of links if you want to keep the attacker's attention, but you can certainly use that as a basis of code to code your own. So maybe you have a product catalog and each product jumps to related products, right? And it gives you a way to constantly make up new stuff, or an asset inventory, whatever you want to do there. So, like I said, you can hash and encrypt such that our other vulnerabilities also consumes resources. This is where a little side trip here provides tracking. What if we had in our website the ability to download certain files? And as soon as they open up that file, it beacons back saying, hey, here's their IP address, here's whatever, right? Salespeople do this now. If you get an email that says, hey, blah, 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 they'll put a little one bit white pixel somewhere in their email that has a unique ID, and it goes to load that image, right? So we're using sales techniques. Again, should be fairly legal to do, but it gives you the opportunity to provide additional tracking across sessions. Again, remember, deception is storytelling. We want to attract the attention to the reveals. Red flags, we already talked about a couple of them, right? Admin equals false. Make up your own, right? Debug equals false, whatever. The more varied you get, the better chance you're going to trip. You can put multiple on a web page. It doesn't take development time to do this stuff, right? In a lot of cases, you could do rewrites from your load balancer, from your security products, from your firewalls, whatever, and inject this so developers don't have to do anything. And again, you catch it at the same place. If it comes to the load balancer, your firewall, stateful firewall that says admin equals false, immediately you take them somewhere else. Requires no real developer time. It deflects attentions from our conceals. The interesting stuff is going to draw their attention. If you take the real stuff that you want to conceal and make it boring, give it boring names, give it stuff that they can't really understand, they're going to take that second. They're going to go to where the good stuff, the encrypted that's not really encrypted, the valuable things that you're red flagging with your terms, right? We all speak a language and we know that some things pop free, sale, right? Other things, kind of, your eyes just glaze over when you start to go through those words. That's the kind of thing you're looking at to do here. Ultimately, what you do needs to kind of confirm Red's suspicions about your organization, right? We are not deceiving them so much as we're helping them to deceive themselves. If Red expects to see something, then they're probably going to fall for that trap. If Red doesn't expect, if you are, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but if you are some kind of company, let's say you're a security firm and you have a product catalog of cars, Red's probably not going to fall for it, right? You have to meet their expectations to keep them engaged. You got to keep their interest. If as soon as they trip a tripwire, you get all boring and there's really nothing to see there, or that admin where they were doing the blind SQL injection, all they're getting back is boring data columns, you've lost their attention, right? They're probably going to go, okay, we'll shelve that and go look for the good stuff. So you've got to keep their interest. Finally, you have to have that feedback loop. If you just think that you're going to deploy your deceptions and then walk away, there's two key metrics that you need to worry about. One, any false positive is too many, right? Somehow you deployed your tripwire in such a way that your business partners have tripped across it rather than an adversary. You did it wrong. Go back to the drawing board, do it again. Two, I'm sure a lot of us have internal red teams. Work with your red teams. Can you catch a red team? Can you get your own red team to trip over the decoys? If you can trip your red team who have much better information about your organization, then you're probably going to catch real adversaries that don't have any information about your organization. So it's very important that you monitor your adversaries' actions once they get into your network, as well as your users' actions if they trip over. Are there any questions about the use of deception? Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about how you figure out how, is it the technical attack that tells you how sophisticated the attacker is or what they're after, or that kind of stuff? Like, how do you figure out, okay, this is a kid? Oh, I'm sorry. So talk a little bit about how do you use like the technical attacks to determine, is this nation state, is this a kid, is this a college student, is it our own red team? Like, how do you make that initial determination?
Absolutely. Ultimately, what you have to do is monitor their actions, right? It's not something that you can necessarily do a snap decision, although I would say, for instance, there is some, I don't know that I've seen any proof, but there's at least conjecture that in a lot of the phishing emails, foreign scammers trying to scam folks, they intentionally put in misspelled words. And they give you a few semi-subtle hints that this might not be legit, because they're filtering out. If you're too smart to fall for the email, then you're probably not going to fall for the next step in the thing, right? So again, if you're doing deceptions for script kiddies, you put stuff that a real red teamer would look at and go, that's not right. No, we don't do that, right? But if they trip over that, it's probably a script kiddie, right? You monitor a little more and you go, okay, now they've created a 0 day and they've deployed a turn. Now, okay, this isn't a script kiddie anymore, right? But there are certainly some things that you can do that are very obvious to experienced red teamers that go, nah, I'm not falling for that one. So, okay, they didn't hit that one, but the very next decoy they did hit, right? And it's like, okay, I caught you. You passed the easy one. Now you're in the semi-sophisticated. So I think that you're the next step up from the script kiddie, right? But it's not something you can just, the first time they touch your system, you go, oh, that's an APT, right?
Or maybe try to build like an easy, medium, hard.
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying. You absolutely have to tailor to those adversaries. That's why I talked about the adversaries, because you've got to tailor to them. And you do want some of those easy, I don't want to be offensive, but only idiots would fall for this. There's a few idiots out there, right? So you definitely do need to tailor easy, medium, hard, right? As part of your deception. And I talked about one example, right? People come in at us from 20 million different directions, right? There's just so many ways. This has to be a coordinated campaign. This can't be some one-off, again, that you just kind of fire and forget. You really probably have to have a person that's, once a month going back and, depending on the size of your organization, once a month going back and reviewing how many people did we trip up, right? Although, so coming from a large organization, Fortune 50, one of the problems that our executive said when I pitched deception is, we already get so many alerts. Where does this fall in the alert basket, right? Like I said, if we do it right, no user is going to read our robots.txt and go to an admin app directly from that, right? No business person, none of our employees have any right to go to that app, and they don't even know about it either unless they're reading robots.txt. That should be zero false positive. If somebody goes to that URL, they're an adversary, and somebody should be following up to figure out what they are, right? Maybe they're just not malicious, but a bad search engine that's ignoring your robots.txt, right? Easy enough to block those folks, though, right? Stop that. And why do you want them indexing it anyway, right? Other questions? Did you get any value out of this? Is this interesting stuff? Got a question back here. By the way, Gartner in 2016 predicted that by 2018, 2 months from now, 10% of enterprises will be using deception in some manner. So this is an up and coming. There's quite a few technology companies out there that are specializing in deception. I'm a consumer, not a producer, so have no opinion on those. Yeah.
Does your company operate a bug bounty program? And if so, how do you see this strategy impacting that?
Absolutely. I can't speak to what my company does or doesn't offer because I don't speak for them. I'm prohibited. Bug bounty programs can be interesting in a couple ways. One, they're validating your decoys, right? So if you're conducting one and you're getting people to trip, you can say that's off limits, right? Typically in bug bounty, I shouldn't say typically, I don't know. One thing that I know you can do with bug bounty programs is you decide what's in scope and what's out of scope. So you can very purposely put where a lot of your decoys are as out of scope, right? If you put that fake admin app as out of scope for bug bounties, then nobody's going to trip over that particular thing. Like I said, though, right, you want a lot of decoys throughout, so you may just have to deal with the noise of that coming in. Can't really speak to necessarily techniques you could use to reduce that, but we could think about it for a while, probably. Other questions? Yes, sir.
How close does any of this come to like violating the "thou shalt not hack back" legal precedent? I mean, you're putting almost malicious stuff. You're slowing up malicious people on your servers, so you're not doing it to them.
Right.
But is some idiot lawyer someday going to take a look at this stuff and say, "This is why my client is innocent. Look at the bad stuff you made him do."
Right. Again, not a lawyer, so this is not a legal opinion. It's your stuff. It's your environment. This is pretty much accepted practice throughout the industry. So I think that an attacker would have a very difficult time saying, they lured me in with a fake URL and their robots.txt and a fake encrypted string, right? That's a pretty tough pitch to make. Where they might have a little bit more of a case is the counterattacks, right? That beaconing. Now again, the example I gave you is something that salespeople are already using. So presumably if somebody was going to sue and lose a lawsuit over, is it legal for people to have a bit inside a program that I stole from them to have me connect back to their server when I open up that program. Now, legal opinion, I think you're on pretty safe ground there. It gets further and further though, right? So maybe you have an Excel program that has a macro that when it executes, collects a bunch of information off of that machine and ships all that information back to you, right? Is that legal? Talk to a lawyer. Again, local laws probably apply, so it's probably legal in 98% of the world and illegal in 2%, and you're going to get sued by that 2% potentially, right? So talk to a lawyer and evaluate the risk at that point. Yes?
Thank you. As Nickerson would call us, I'm an adversarial engineer.
Yes.
The problem I have is we're brought in for 40 hours, maybe 80 hours. You said there's an average detection time of 46 days. Quite a dichotomy.
Right.
So we often ask to be whitelisted.
Right.
Now that bypasses all these security controls, so it's not necessarily testing your security environment.
Right.
How do you deal with that? Or how would you recommend dealing with that?
Right. So I would suggest that whitelisting could mean a couple things. Whitelisting could mean that you don't trip over the tripwires. My suggestion would be whitelisting would mean I do have you trip over the tripwires, but since I know what your IP address is coming in, I just, rather than throw that on the glass to say this is an alert that has to happen, I accumulate those. So when we do our post-pen testing, we say, hey, I saw you here, I saw you here, I saw you here, I saw you here. I didn't do anything about it, but if I stop you there, or I tell you, you're now in, yep, you're now in the tar pit, you're now in the whatever, thank you for playing, start again, go back to start, right? I really think it is essential, I'm gonna use that word, it is essential that you get Red Team to come in and do these kinds of exercises with the decoys in place. Because if Red Team's not tripping over them, then adversaries not tripping over them, right? But obviously, when you're in the middle of those exercises, I said no false positives. I would say Red Team's not really a false positive. You just proved that the decoy is deployed correctly and working fine, right?
Well, and working in a very accelerated manner. We're about 48 hours.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
We have 46 days, we may never hit that.
Right, absolutely. That feedback loop has to be pretty immediate, right? So again, I don't know how you have more experience with, I know Dustin, so he has more experience with other firms. I know my firm. When we have Red Team exercises, we will have our security folks sitting with the Red Team side by side because they're learning, right? They're learning what Red Team does. And it would be very easy to go alert, and our guy on his workstation goes, oh, you just stumbled into the tar pit. Go back to start, right? But you're absolutely right. If you're hiring these folks, they're pretty expensive to come in. They have a very limited time. Make sure that that feedback loop is near immediate to them to say, stop what you're doing, go back to start. Don't use that credit anymore. We got you, right? But that's a wonderful conversation to have with the Red Team you hired, right? And especially when they come back in next year and you trip them up again and you go, got you again. You knew we had deceptions. You knew we had decoys and tripwires, and we got you again. What a feeling, right? Rather than, we were on domain, we took control of your domain controller and you didn't even know we were here, which is probably much more typical. Other questions?
Is anyone who is doing this kind of stuff in the wild, like you guys, I know not specific to your company, but is anyone doing this along the lines of legal prosecution or saying, you know what, I'm pretty sure this person's going after something. I want to get them far enough in that it's not entrapment, but far enough in that I can pretty much go after them. And we know attribution's hard, right? But just curious.
I'm not aware. I'm not aware of those, of any situations, pro or con to what you said. I would repeat what you just finished yours with is, Attribution is really, really hard. Nation states, I feel, have failed at attribution in the past. It's really hard for all but the most obvious case, right? You send your security guy to the picnic table out in front of your building where the guy's hacking your Wi-Fi and go, here's video of him hacking our Wi-Fi, right? Maybe, again, the problem, the only people that you probably are going to be able to catch attribution are either the people you hired to do it or script kiddies, anybody really good. Yeah, they're coming through Tor, they're using VPNs, they're bouncing 12 different ways. They're using their neighbors because, hey, they hacked their WPA too, right? So, anything else? Thank you very much for your attendance. I hope you got something out of this. Have a great time.